smelters and factory owners. So we will talk about viewers, iron smelters and the factory owners. But what happened to them under British rule? That is, the industries, how they got affected. So I'll show you a picture here and then it will start the discussion. These are the ships, these are trading ships, and these are the trading ships on the port of Surat. Surat is a port city and this is in Gujarat. So Surat is in Gujarat, and if you take the west coast of India, west coast, and this was one of the most important ports at that time when India was doing trade. So the Dutch, the English, every foreign traders, they would come through this port. But this was all early 17th century, but the importance of this port declined in 18th century. You'll know how. Why? The first thing is, whatever crafts we have and whatever industry we have, that is, we are talking about Indian subcontinent at that time, and what happened under British rule. So we'll focus on two main industries, and these two main industries are textile, that is the textile industry, and the second industry we are going to talk about is iron and steel, loha and ispat. Textile is kapda udyog. Why we are discussing? Because these two industry, even at that time and now also in modern era also, these two industries are all giving boon, or the economy is based on this. The economy, GDP, all is based on the manufacturing, the production the company does. So if I take you to these two, textile or iron and steel, the importance still remains the same. What happened in Britain was the mechanized production. That is, Britain, the industrial revolution took place, Audyogikaran, it started in Britain. So this gave rise to mass production in low price. So this iron and steel company, it went ahead. And if I can tell you that 1850s, the Britain was actually known as the workshop of the world. That is, the iron and steel industry of Britain, it went, or it emancipated so much that it was called as the workshop of whole world, workshop of whole world. That is, everything is done here. Everyone gets content from here, iron and steel from here. So what happened in India? Because British colony was India. India was British colony only. So at that time, East India Company we are talking about, and East India Company was totally given the right to trade. There was no other company. So because the company, it was a company, it was a trading company. So because they want to keep their interest, or their interest, they take control of certain territory, that is occupation of territory, right? So the pattern changed of trade in India, because we were the colony of Britain. So the late 18th century, if I take you, company was doing what in late 18th century? Company was, let me tell you, late 18th century, you can say 1750 and afterwards, you can think about that. So company was actually buying goods from India, and then it was exporting them and selling them in England and Europe. So the company was getting huge profits from the sale of Indian products. If I can tell you that in England is just above Europe, it was the part of European Union, but Brexit is taking place. So East India Company at that time, Britain and Europe, these were the markets of Indian goods. They used to export, take from here and sell it there, right? So what happened? There was other thing also happening. Industrial production was going on in Britain. So the British industrialists, they thought India is such a huge country. It has huge population. And they saw India as the main market. That is, why not to, this MG is for manufactured good. Why not to sell the manufactured good which we produce here to India? So now we see India was flooded with the products from Britain, UK, because we were colony as well. So Indians, these are Vastukars, Kashtkar, that is the craftsmen and industrialist people. What would happen to East India Company? East India Company is taking control because it has all the control of trade. What would happen to these people, Indian people? So I'll show you this picture. This was the time when it was called as the workshop of the world, iron and steel industry in Britain. So as I suggested, I'll start with this Indian textile. First textile industry we are going to take, and then I'll talk about the iron and steel industry. So textile industry, if I take you back to 1750, India was one of the giant in textile production. That is, even before the British actually conquered Bengal, and Bengal was actually the hub of cotton textiles and the textiles in India. Even before British acquired it, or not acquired, actually conquered, already India was the giant, the world largest producer of cotton textiles. We were already supplying a huge bunch of cotton textiles to all over globe. That is, we were highly respected. The cotton textiles were highly regarded. Why? Because we had something special in our quality. Bengal was giving the main percentage. So why we were famous? As I said, the textile we had, the quality was immense, fine. It was very, very fine. And the craftsmanship, the handmade, the kind of work done on the cotton or the cloth were exquisite. Exquisite means ecstatic. And it was not only the world, I'll tell you, even our neighbors. This is Asia, so West Asia, because this is the nearest to India. This is India. This is West Asia. It's Central Asia, and also Western, and then Southeast Asia. Now Southeast Asia, if I can name that Southeast Asia places, it was basically Java, Sumatra, and Penang. So you can see that whichever was closer to India, Asian export was too much. Too much means in a good way. Cotton textile. So Java, Sumatra, and Penang. Let me show you here. This is India. I am talking about the right side of India, which is the Asia. So this is the southeast. Java, Sumatra, and here you see Penang. Okay. So all these are Southeast Asian countries. They were requiring it, and we were supplying it, and a fine quality stuff we were providing it. So if I take you to 16th century, the European company, what were they doing? They were coming to India. They're buying the cloth from the Indian weavers because trade and craftsmanship was ecstatic. And they were selling it with a good profit. So this is proper Patola Nakrai swag. This is a picture of Patola weaving. Patola weaving. This is a mid-19th century picture I'm showing you. 1850 around, you can imagine. So this Patola was especially on the left side, or the Ahmedabad Patan and Suraj part. And this Patola was highly valued in a country called Indonesia. And you will be elated to know that in this local tradition also of Indonesian local culture, this Patola is already there, was inscribed now. So now it is in the culture, Patola weaving. So this is the good work, excellent work, which Indian textiles provide to this world. So this Patan, Ahmedabad, and Surat. These were the hub of this patola weaving. So this picture is also showing you about the plain white, the checks and stripes where the center points or trading centers were there. The shints I'll talk about. Silk is a resham, silk. So this area, and this area, these three areas are very important because they were having ports. At that time, mainly the trading was done through trade, these sea route. And these all places are important because the textiles were going through land routes. And to be very precise, the Bengal was the hub. Till now, you see, Bangladesh is the world leader in textile, this making and selling. Now, how do this European knew about all these? And how does these different names of this textiles came, cotton came? So, it didn't start in India. European, they saw Indian cloth, cotton cloth, not in India. They get to know about Indian textile or cotton first with Arab merchants, Arab Vyapari in Mosul. And Mosul still in Iraq. So it's a place in Iraq, and the merchants, their European traders saw it. This is Iraq and this is a Mosul I'm talking about. And it is quite linked with the European countries. So this was the trading going on. And the merchants, these Mosul merchants were having this Indian cloth. That is, if you take out your ring from your hand and if you pass this cloth, one than, one piece good, it will come out. So it was so fine. So that is how they called it as muslin or muslin, because they found it first in Mosul of Iraq. We call it as malmal. In our country now and previously also, we call it as malmal, right? After that, what happened? How did this different name came up? If you remember, Vasco da Gama, right? Vasco da Gama, he was a Portuguese. He was from Portugal. So he came first, or he landed in India first in Calicut. Basically, Goa is the hub, Portuguese culture. But Vasco da Gama, he was a Portuguese, he came first in Calicut. But Calicut is in Kerala right now. NIT Calicut, if you go to engineering, you'll see. So this Calicut was the first place they came. And the Portuguese basically came for what? They came for spices. Everyone was coming for spices, especially the black pepper. That was called as black gold. The cardamom and everything was added up. So they came for spices. But when they came here, and they got to know about the cotton textile, which was produced in India. So this cotton textile, they loved that so much that along with the spices, when they came, they had a double advantage. Spice was there already. But the cotton cloth, as I said, was something very special to them. They didn't know about that. So when they went back, they took these spices and the cotton textile along with this. And because they came to Calicut, when they went back, so they regarded it as a general name called as calico. So now at that time, all the general name for the cotton textile was called as calico. Okay, it's a default name now. Calico means cotton textile. And it has come from Calicut, which is in Kerala, which is in India. So I'll show you a picture of calico. See, this is the left one is the fine quality. And there is a harder, you can say, threading here on the drill calico. So we have wide width calico, free retardant calico, classic calico, fabric and drill calico. So this is a cotton textile, but muslin started from Mosul and calico came from Calicut. Now I'll show you a picture. There is an order. This is just an order slip. So British people, they send this order book or this order to Bengal. And this Bengal people, basically the agents. And they wanted these cloth. And this happened in 1730. So if I show you this picture, Bahi Khata, account book. So it's clearly written, not very clear here, but the name of what kind of cloth they want, how much they want, what is the rate, and you'll be surprised to know the rate were already decided in London. It was already decided there, Great Britain. And it would take 2 years. That is the order will be given 2 years in advance, because time, send orders, then the cloth will be woven, then it will be shipped again back to India, the Britain. So this will take around 2 years. At that time, it was not just flight going and taking. So once it comes to London, it was being auctioned and then it will be sold. So this is a Bahi Khata. This is just an account book, order book. So from this we know right now that what was happening at that time. What kind of clothes were in demand? What kind of different clothes were there available? So you will be happy to know that in 1730, I am talking about the 18th century, early 18th century, 6 lakh, to be precise, 5,89,000. So just assume that it is 6 lakh, around 6 lakh. 6 lakh than. Than is piece good, one piece good. So 6 lakh piece good were being sought or were being ordered from Britain to India through Bengal agents. So this one piece wood was 20 yards by 1 yard. So 1 yard is 3 feet, and 1 yard is 36 inches, and 1 meter is 3.28 feet. So you can convert feet to meter. So you'll know how this meter conversion is there. So basically it's 20 yards by 1 yard, and this is one piece, and in total 6 lakh pieces were being ordered in 1730. Than we call it. In India we still call it as a than. One piece of cloth. So what you see here is this whole paper is giving us all the idea of that time. Around 100 to 98 to be precise, around 98 varieties of cotton, kapas, and silk, resham. That is suti and resham, cotton and silk cloths were required at that time, or they were ordered at that time. And the India was very famous for the shints. This picture I'll just talk about that. And kosa, bandana, and there were other which were not named, but they were named because of the place from where that cloth was coming. Kasim Bazar, Patna, Calcutta, Odisha, Charpur. This Kasim Bazar and Charpur, this was in Bengal. Okay. Now still you find it in Bengal, and some parts have gone to the Bangladesh. Right? So East Pakistan previously, now it is, and this whole area is all the name I'm talking about. Some part of Bihar, some part of Odisha, and Bengal in total. So this is the basic area of this production. Not very much production, but weaving and then selling, making cloth. Okay. Now this is a Jamdani weaving. So this Jamdani is a very fine muslin. And if you see, they are typically woven on the loom, the grey and white color. And the thread is basically the mixture of cotton and gold thread. It is combined gold and cotton. So you see the picture and you can imagine what kind of Jamdani weaving was there. So this Jamdani weaving was very famous, and the important center was Dhaka in Bengal, and Lucknow in United Provinces, that is today's Uttar Pradesh. So Lucknow is the capital of Uttar Pradesh right now, and this is Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. So these two places were the important centers of Jamdani weaving. Now let us discuss about this order book. Okay, now in this order book, what do you see here? The British people or British traders, they gave the order to the Bengal or Calcutta people, or the agents basically. So first thing was, let us discuss one by one, that is shints. One was kosa, some of them I am talking about. Kosa, kosa as it is written, but it is khasa or kosa, and bandana. Now, these names have originated from our Hindi words. That is, if you want to sprinkle some water on your brother or your sister morning, or your mother sprinkles some water on your face, you're not waking up, and this is called cheat. And these on the cloth, this cheat or these simple droplets or the imprinting was of flowers and the petals. So this was cheat. This printed cotton cloths called cheat. This cheat is derived from the Hindi word called cheat, that is sprinkling water. And cloth is small, colorful, flowery design it was. And in 1680s, people were crazy about this. So it has so much craze for this printed Indian cotton textiles in England and Europe, because it has special exquisite type of floral designs. The texture was very good and it was quite relatively cheap also. So not only the rich people were interested in it, but also the queen herself, the English queen, she was also wearing cheap Indian fabric. Can you imagine? So let us take bandana now. Bandana is basically the small cloth, and you can wear it on your head and you can wear it on your neck also. These are the printed scarf for the neck or the head. Basically, bandana is now a brightly colored kind of say the cloth which we see today. But this bandana has come from the word bandna, sari bandna, lungi bandna. Shins has come from cheat, Hindi word. Bandna has given rise to bandana. You see this? The name has originated from bandna. And this is a cloth. You can take it and use that as a scarf, neck or head. So these two pictures which I am showing you here. The right one is bandana design. So I am talking to you about early 20th century, this picture. So what you see here, this is odhani type, odhani. So these two tie and dye silk pieces, there are two pieces actually. So they will take a cloth, they will tie some part, and they will put it to dye. When this dyeing is done, some part will get color, some part won't get color. So there will be a pattern, there will be a design will come, and these two cloth will be combined through say gold thread embroidery. So they have used a gold thread embroidery to combine these two different pieces of cloth. Okay. So Rajasthan and Gujarat were the hub of this place. Rajasthan and Gujarat is this place. Rajasthan upper Gujarat. So this was special place for this bandana. Now this is the cheap production I'm talking about. The main thing was it was produced in Masulipatnam, Andhra Pradesh, mid 19th century. Cheat. Pani ke cheete cheetna, fenkna. And this was exported to Iran and Europe also. So bandana has come from Hindi word which is bandha. See, some other cloths were coming from the place of origin, from where they have come. That is the Qasim Bazar cloth, Patna cloth, Calcutta cloth, Odisha cloth, Charpur cloth. So let me show you the picture again, because you need to keep it inside your mind. This is Bihar, Odisha, Calcutta, Charpur, Qasim Bazar is here with the place I am showing you here. Okay. So the cloth were also renowned from the place also, from where they have come. Indian textile in European market. So the European markets in this, the Indian textiles were still making the mark. If I take you to early 18th century, that is around 1710, 1720, the textile from India, it was required there, demanded there, because it was quite fine, very fine, and the embroidery was ecstatic, out of the world. So in England basically, the wool and silk makers, the producers, the manufacturers, they started protesting against these Indian cotton textiles import of ayat. So they pressurized the government to put a ban on the Indian cotton textiles. And you know, the best one was what? Shins. Shins was the best one. So government did that exactly. In 1720, British government actually did this. It enacted a legislation or passed a law banning what? Banning the use of printed cotton textiles called cheened in England. That is, they didn't ban everything, but they passed a law that the printed cotton textile chins will not be used. Because the chins was not only used by the rich, but also being worn by the queen herself. So this was known, interestingly, you would be happy to know that this legislation was called as Calicut Act. This act was known as, it has come from Calicut, the Kerala area. Okay, Calicut Act it was called. I want to show you a picture. This is a picture of a Dutch settlement, and this is in India. And this was 17th century. So because Cochin and all those ports, wherever these different Europeans came, they settled here, or they created their settlement. This is the Dutch settlement. Dutch, Netherlands, Holland. So what would the British would do? See, first thing is, what the British was doing, they were taking the plain cloth and they were printing the Indian design only. They were trying to imitate, nakal utarna. So they were imitating and then they were selling it in England, right, on white muslin or unbleached Indian cloth. So what happens always, that competition leads to technical innovation. Like two people are running. You know that he's going to win. But when you want to win with him, you will put all your effort. And sometimes you will beat him also. So India and England, because the Indian cloth were, as I said, were best. So there was a competition posed by, or was created somehow. And there was a technological innovation, there were experiments, there were discoveries, and there were inventions also. So they created it. I'll give an example. This is the spinning jenny, and this was invented by John Kay in 1764. The name is total John William Kay, and he invented spinning jenny. So what was happening? This increased the productivity to multiple folds. The traditional symbols, only one man can do on one spindle, but in spinning jenny, one person or one worker can operate on several spindles at a same time, spindles, where the threads are rounded. So this wheel, if you see, this is turned and all the spindles are rotated at the same time. So this increased the productivity. Okay. And along with this, there was another person, and he was called Richard Arkwright. What? No, actually he did a different thing. He invented the steam engine. But this steam engine and this steam technology was used everywhere. Like in railways, steam engine. So this, you see, when it rounds, this is also a textile industry. So when this round or this wheel goes, this steam engine Arkwright, and this also in 1786 was the year, and this revolutionized the cotton textile weaving also. Okay, cotton textile weaving also, it was revolutionized at that time, right? So this was a path-breaking spinning jenny and this steam engine. So even after that, the Indian textile was still on the go. That is, it was dominating the world trade till the end of 18th century. And who were getting profit with that? The Dutch, the French, the English. All were getting benefited and they were making huge profits. So what they were doing was, they would come here in India and they will bring silver with them, chandi. And they will trade this silver with the cotton or with the textiles which are being made here. But English, previously they were doing the same thing, bringing silver. But the English East India Company, it got the Diwani of Bengal, it got the political power in Bengal. And when they got the power, they all got power of all the revenue system also. So now they don't have to bring this silver. They were taking revenue from India and buying content from India only. So this is a picture I showed you several times. These are all the places which were very important, and these right place which I am showing you, eastern part of India. This is, at that time it was Bangladesh also. So Bengal was one of the important center even for plain white, checks and stripes, shins, silk. So this Dhaka, which is presently the capital of Bangladesh, it's a very small country, but this is a leading country all over the world for textiles. Even India is not ahead of it. So Dhaka, and here the Malmal and Jamdani weaving, this place was very famous for this Malmal and Jamdani. Okay. Along with this area, especially because they had the vicinity towards this, they had this important port near it. That is why, and also the places favor the weaving textiles, etc. So now the question comes, who were the weavers actually? Weavers, these are the communities that specialize in weaving, making cloth, and it has certain steps. And these weaving or these weavers, they will pass, because he is a dad and he is a kid. For example, dad will pass on this specialization to the next generation. Generation to generation, they were passing it on. So at that time, let me name a few of the weavers. If I take you to Bengal, Tanti were very famous. They were weavers. If I take you to North India, the Julahas, Kabir Das, he came from Julaha family. So the Julahas and the Momins, Momin Ansar, Momin, these all were the weavers. And then this is I'm talking about the North India. If I take you to South India, the famous were the people who were involved in this weaving were Saleh, the Kaikolar, and also the Devangs. So Saleh, Kaikolar and Devangs, they were from the southern India. So this weaving work has a whole series of steps. The first step of this production of cloth was spinning. And this spinning, that is, you say, for example, you have kapas or cotton. Now you have to make the thread out of it. So now the thread will be used later. So I'll just give you an example of, again, this cotton, and you want to make the thread. So thread was spun on this charkha and rolled on a takli. So this spinning work was mainly done by women, mostly done by women. So just I indicated charkha and takli. They were very important instruments. So this charkha you can rotate it, and then it will found, and there is a takli there. Takli, the spindle basically. And this is a charkha, and this is moved in a round ways, and then the thread will come here and it will be rounded on the takli. This is charkha and this is takli. And these were the instruments actually found everywhere, every weaving community, every home at that time. Okay, once this thread is made, what is the second work? The second work is, now the thread is ready, you have to make cloth. So this cloth were done by the weaver, mainly men. So men were doing this weaving, and spinning was done by mainly women, right? And not only this, once the cloth is ready, there are certain things to be done. First, you have to dye it, color it, and then you have to put some special kind of print on that cloth. So who were doing it? So there is a whole people related in this job. So this coloring was done by, or dyeing was done by rangres, and the printing was done by this woman printing. This man is doing dyeing, he is coloring the cloth, and this woman is doing the block printing. And they were very specialized people, chipigars. She is a chippigar. Okay, let me show you the picture. First work was charkha and takli, that is the spinning work. And then once the thread is ready, then the making of cloth. He is making the cloth. Tanti is doing. And then rangrez, coloring. And then finally the block printers, the chippigars. And this is a highly specialized work, you know. So this was the whole step. And millions of Indians were involved, and they were getting livelihood and money and feeding their kids and family with this work only. And if you see this tanti, they are working in pit loom. Pit is, there is a pit here, and the person who is sitting, his legs are in this pit, and there is a specialized way of weaving it. They use their hand also, they use their legs also. There is a word which will come later, orang. Let me tell you, this is a Persian word for warehouse, for storehouse. Even this is used for workshop also. So this is the place where the stuff which has to be sent is kept here, or which is to be made is kept here. So what happened? The decline of Indian textiles. As I told you that the Britain was technically evolving or enhancing their work in the field of textiles and others. So the Indian textiles industry and the people who are related to it, they got affected because of the development of cotton industry in Britain. What was the effect? The first effect was that the Indian stuff was going to America also and European markets. So now the English or British goods are, these textiles are also coming to America and Europe. Now there is a competition between Indian and British textiles. So India was losing at that time. British textiles were ahead. Second problem was how the decline of textile took place. Second thing was the export to England and other places. There were heavy duty being levied. There are heavy tax or duties being imposed. So once nobody will send with this heavy tax and nobody will even buy it because of the heavy taxes. So that is how America and Europe, which were our traditional, Africa also. So our traditional market, Indian traditional market, Africa, America and Europe, slowly and gradually, English made cotton textile, they ousted, or they say with the competition, they actually made us came way back. Okay, that is how the Indian textile declined. Because it was all about English made cotton textiles everywhere now. So the Bengal weavers were worst hit. With Bengal's weaver, I showed you a picture of a order book. That is, they got money, they got order of 6 lakh piece goods. And it was a huge number. And they were getting money in advance also. But because the British made cotton textile took over everywhere in world also, in India also, so they were not getting advances. Tanti and Julahas and everyone, the agents were not coming, they were not giving them money. So they faced that problem. So people wrote also, I'll tell you about that thing, but let me complete this one first. What happened? The weaver got distressed, unhappy and very distressed, and they wrote petitions to the government that we want help. We are dying because we are not having any work. So the worst was still to come. The duration was still to come. What happened in 1830s? It started that the British cloth, it was going to America and other places, but Africa. Now it has started coming to India. Even just after 50 years, 1880, the Indian cloth were just 1/3 being used. That is, 2/3 of the cloth worn by Indians or used by Indians were all coming from Britain. That is, majority of the dresses we were wearing were from Britain cotton textiles or different textiles. So the rural women which were actually involved in spinning, I told you women were doing the spinning work, they all got jobless because now they don't have any work. Everyone was using the Vilaiti dresses, Vilaiti's kapda. But the one thing was there, the handloom, Hath Kargha Udyog, handloom weaving, it did not completely die, because there were certain design, there were certain patterns, there were certain borders, there were certain work which cannot be done by machines. It needs human work. For example, a sari, okay, it needs intricate borders, very specialized borders. So there were people who used to work with hand, and this handmade was rich people were using. Also, the middle classes were also very happy with this. They were using it, right? So that is how this whole did not die, this handloom weaving. One more thing was there. The coarse cloth, that is the mota kapda, which was worn by the poor people. And this was not this cannot be created by these big machines. So Hatkargha Udyog and handloom weaving was still there. I'll tell you one more thing. There are two places, you might have heard about them. Sholapur, it's in Maharashtra right now, Western India basically, and Madura, which is Madurai only, in South India. So these two places actually became the center point, main important hub in the late century of weaving. For weaving, these places became so important, right? Because in different centuries, different time, different place got prominence, and after which the Mahatma Gandhi national movement, he said whatever is coming from British, just boycott these textiles. We don't want the foreign textiles. And people were actually burning it. And he said you have to use the hand spun and hand woven cloth, as I said, handloom and this khadi type of charkha takli type of cloth. So the charkha became so important, it became the symbol of Rashtravad, nationalism. If you see all the leaders we have, netas, they always wear khadi. So this khadi became the symbol of nationalism. And this became so important in 1931. At that time, only Indian National Congress was there, because INC, Indian National Congress, has given us the freedom. Neither RSS nor BJP, they were not there at that time. So Indian National Congress, they gave us all this independence, and their flag was very important. And the center of this flag, this charkha was put there. You can imagine the importance of the charkha at that time, that the Indian National Congress took in 1931 this charkha and put it inside there, in between their national flag, their flag, which actually became the national flag later on with some changes. So what would happen to the weavers and spinners? Some would become agricultural laborers, some migrate to kheti har mazdoor, some migrated to cities, some went outside country to do plantations in Africa and South America, and Kenya, Tanzania, Fiji, and there were new cotton mills coming up, and these new cotton mills need the workers. So Bombay, Ahmedabad, Sholapur, Nagpur, Kanpur, people went for their work. Okay, these are all the places I'm trying to show of new cotton mills which came up. Now I was telling about the plight and distress of the people. So how this was being indicated and shown. In 1823, the company government, it got 12,000 petitions from weavers, bunkers, and they said that we were working for you, you were giving us orders, our orangs are full, or our orangs we have already taken, and we are giving money for that, and you are giving us advance money, now you are not giving advance. So what would happen to us? There are millions of people who are only working in this weaving industry, so we will starve for food. This is what they said. There is one more source we have, and this is a widow spinner, and a woman who was a spinner also and widow also. In 1828, she wrote to Bengali newspaper Samachar Darpan, and she said that please write this. I am in distress. So what was the problem with her? That she is a spinner. She used to spin, that is, spin for the cloth, making this thread. So she said, 22, I was married. I am widow now. I have three women or girls, and when my husband died, Shad, all the money gone. But because I started spinning, This Takli and Charkha became my life. And now all my girls, I married them, and I saved this 28 rupees because I was doing this spinning in this weaving industry. 28 rupees was too much at that time. And all the married. Now the thing is, two women, mother-in-law and me, these two women, they don't have money. That is, they are living here. They don't have money because the people are saying that the vilaiti kapda or the foreign kapda, foreign textile, people are using it. So we don't have anything to do. What do we do? So this is the Vedana, this is the plight or distress they showed. Okay. Cotton mills come up. We are talking about India. Various mills at that time that came up. So how did they came up, and how did they come up, and what were the problem they were facing? The first cotton mill that was established in India, it was not a cotton mill actually, it was a spinning mill. And this spinning basically is making of thread from the content like the cotton, etc., raw cotton. So we are talking about Bombay 1854. Please remember, first cotton mill in India, which was a spinning mill, and it was established in Bombay in 1854. Okay, and Bombay became a very important port, very important city, very important trade center, because at that time it was all import and export through the sea route. And I am talking about the early 19th century. This Bombay became a very important port, and the export was not only to England, it was also to China. Especially I am talking about these spinning results. So all this area which you see here, this is very famous fertile area. This round, the filled round circle, this is showing the place where there was black soil, and as we have seen, black soil is suitable for cotton produce. So this was the best area, and since the raw material can be easily being received, or the raw material can easily be transported to Mumbai, that is why this Mumbai became so important. This is a picture I am showing you, and this you see mostly the spinning work is being done by women, and this is the picture of 1900. So this 1900, by 1900, in Bombay itself, in Mumbai, today's Mumbai itself, around 84 mills, 84 number of mills they came up. And mostly the mills were owned by either Parsis or the Gujaratis. You know this left or western coast of India, they are the land or the home for the Parsis. Parsi came from the Arab world, and they became indigenous. And Gujarati, we have a Kutchi, etc. This Gujarati are considered to be the best business mind. Even the most rich person in India is a Gujarati only. So that is how they made a lot of money through trade to China and England. And what about other places? Ahmedabad, the first mill was in 1861, and just next year, 1862, it was a mill which came up in Kanpur. Kanpur at that time it was under United Provinces. Today it is in Uttar Pradesh. So when this mill came up, there was an exponential increase in the demand of labor, because who is going to do the work? Labor. So what happened? All the poor peasants, the farmers, the artisans, the artists, the agricultural laborers, they just moved or migrated to the cities because they were getting work in the mills and they were required there. But when this textile industry came up, as I said, everything comes with challenges. So at that time, textile industry faced many challenges, many problems. The first was that, the textile which were imported from Britain, they were very cheap because they were coming from an industrial production. And it was very difficult to compete with them. So there was a great competition between this Indian and British textiles, and British won in this race. Okay, and there is one more aspect. What would happen in any country if you want the industrial growth of the indigenous people or indigenous industries? What would happen? The import will be either stopped, or it will, the duty or the taxes levied on import will be huge. That is, the person outside will never come here. They will never send any stuff, and even if he sends it, it will be of very highest rate. So this is how the government. This happened in India when we got this independence. So people, this say 10 rupees, this we are getting, okay, and 100 this coming from outside. Nobody will take 100. They will take it in 10 rupees, right? So the government does that in every country. But the problem with us was what? The problem with us was we were not having any government, but basically we were having British rule. And British rule, they never ever cared about anyone except their munafa, their amount, money. Okay. So first thing, that the local industries, we didn't get any protection. But still, we did good job. How? In textile industry and iron and steel industry also, you'll see that whenever we got boon, or our demand was there, it was only when British demand was not there, or it was say moved somewhere else. I'll give you an example. What happened in First World War? The textile what was prepared or made in Britain, they all went to the for feeding the First World War. And when all the textile is going there, then Britain cannot export it to any other country like India. So now the textile industries of India, the British said they wanted the Indian factory to make these textiles so that they can send it to this world war. And that only happened when British has some problem. Otherwise, they didn't care. Okay. Now, if I talk about iron and steel, I need to start with a story. I'll start a story or the incident or the event that happened in Mysore. Tipu Sultan. He was Sher-e Mysore. He was tiger of Mysore, and his father also, Hyder Ali. He was also a very great ruler, very powerful ruler, and they didn't just bend down before Britishers. They fought, and they fought with all their valor, power. So this is the sword I am talking about. I'll just talk about that. First, let me complete the Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan, he ruled Mysore till 1799, and he fought 4 wars, because one war is not enough for him, because Britishers cannot hold him for just one war. They had to fight 4 wars with him. Ultimately, Tipu Sultan was killed, and when he was killed while in the battle, he died with the sword in his hand. So this was the sword I am talking about, sword yani talwar. So this is a legendary sword. We need to talk about this sword. So sword was taken to England, and in museum it was taken. But we know a man, we talk about him a lot, Vijay Mallya, Kingfisher's proprietor. Now he brought back this sword in an auction, but that's a different story. Okay, so the basic thing was, this sword was so strong. It was made in a way that is the steel and the iron at that time. We are talking about that era when we were competing with British. We are not having that much of resources, but still we had this kind of stuff like this sword and other thing that were on top of its class. So you see, these are Quran ayats, and victories of war is written here, and this is the tiger head looking downwards. So this the most important thing here is This talwar or this sword was made like this, that if your dushman or your enemy is wearing all the armor, he is wearing every element that can protect him, still this talwar or this sword will penetrate. Okay, the main thing was the opponent armor, it will rip off, it will penetrate inside it. So what was the quality? You can see. So this quality of the sword has a special name, has a special technique to make it. So this, the quality was that it was a special type of steel. This steel, this was called as Wood's steel. Wood's steel. It was special type of steel being made all over and produced all over the South India. And this was so special that it can penetrate any armor, and because of the high carbon content in it. So carbon content mixed with the iron produces this steel, and this steel is called wood steel. And that is how this steel is what when we start our story of iron and steel industry in India, we start with this wood steel and we take back our discussion to Tipu Sultan. So this one more thing was that this can be made in a flowing water or wavy pattern. And these crystals of very small carbon crystals were embedded in the iron, and that is how this pattern has come. This carbon is an element. And if you mix this carbon with various metals and non-metals, it will change the property also. This is how happened with this wood's steel. Okay, now I'll show you the picture of Francis Buchanan. Now he is Francis Buchanan, and he came to Mysore, and he gave us the record or the content of this wood steel. So Francis Buchanan toured Mysore in 1800 after Tipu's death, and this is the wood steel I'm talking about. The third one which you see is the excellent quality of woods of which this sword was being made. We have different type of woods, knot woods, borderline. So what you see here, the pattern, is because of that carbon which I'm talking about, that special carbon. Okay, it will change the property of that iron, and that will become a very hard and very lethal weapon if you make a sword or anything with this. Even the utensils are also made out of this. How this was made, it was told by Buchanan. So this all area, not only the Mysore, all through the South India, this was made, and all these swords are made in these smelting furnaces, means the content which is coming from the smelting furnaces. So this smelting, which is called as praglan in Hindi, the iron was mixed with, because you need to have a carbon, for that the charcoal was mixed. Charcoal is a form of wood when it is burned, and then it can be used as a heating one, right? So now these are placed in a clay pot, and the temperature is controlled, and with this control of temperature, the smelter, the praglak, the people who work with iron, with this heat, they would produce this steel ingots. Steel ingots is nothing but the round shaped steel. You know, it's a iron or steel which come, and that will be used for making different utensils and stuffs like the sword. And this was not only used in India. Okay, this was also being sent and exported to West and Central Asia. Western Asia and Central Asia. So this wood steel and the smelting work and the blacksmith work and the iron work, the steel work was so popular that it was exported also, and it was in great demand. Now what is this? What is smelting? Let us see what is smelting first. Smelting is simple process in which the rock is taken, it can be rock or a soil, and now it is heated. You know, every element has a melting point or heating point. So when it is melted or heated, the dhatu or the metal will melt, and then you will get the metal. That is how the iron is achieved or extracted from the iron ore, and other content are extracted from different their combination, which we find in the general prakriti or natural resources. So this woods has come from where? This woods is actually a word, anglicized word of Indian words, Indian languages word. Because in steel, what is steel called in Kannada? In Kannada, steel is called ukku. In Telugu, the steel is called as hukku. Kannada, ukku, Telugu, hukku. In Tamil and Malayalam, the same steel is called as urukku. Urukku. And all these mean the same thing. Ukku, hurukku, hukku and urukku. So the English were not able to pronounce it properly and they would call it as a word, anglicized word, and that is called woods. W-O-O-T-Z. So this steel and wood steel has come from these words only, wood steel. But I still have my apprehensions because I don't know how this woods has come from ukku, hukku, rukku. But anyways, the book is saying, history is saying, so believe it. So this is the anglicized version of all these words. Okay. So now this wood steel is famous all over the world. How? Even the greatest Michael Faraday, we know Einstein, we know these many special people, Heisenberg, etc. Michael Faraday, he was the inventor or discoverer, not inventor, discoverer of electricity and electromagnetism. So he is a very great personality who has given us the modern world. So he spent 4 years and he studied about the properties of Indian woods, Indian wood steel. That is from 1818 till 1822. He did that. But when we reached this mid-19, the art of making wood steel, the making process actually died down, completely lost. Because the problem was the iron and steel was coming now from England, Britain. So it slowly and gradually displaced what was being made by the Indian people, Indian craftsmen people. Okay. So it couldn't face the competition of British iron steel. Okay, there is a word coming, bellows. Bellows is a device or equipment that can pump air. Now you see here, this is a bag kind of thing and it has 2 handles. So when you push this handle up, there is air come inside, and when you push it down, the air comes outside. And then this, because this charcoal and etc., they need continuous air to burn. And then how you can use this iron stick etc. to work and to shape them. So this wood steel is not a child's play. Making it, this is a very specialized technique of refining iron. So production of wood steel was not very easy. So if you talk about Bihar and central India, at that time, I'm talking about end of the 19th century, every district was having a smelter who used to work for iron smelting, this making of this kind of steel, etc. And these furnaces were specially built of mitti, clay and bricks. So I'll show you this picture. These are the bricks, and here you see the charcoal is mixed with the iron, and then the steel is with certain temperature control. Finally, what we just talked about, this kind of result will come. So with charcoal you get the carbon content also. So these furnaces were built of clay and sun-dried bricks. And as I said, smelting was done, it's a hard process, so it was done mainly by men. Smelting was done by men. And the bellows, this was the pumping of air to keep this charcoal burning was done normally by the women. Okay. So this every thing was decided who is going to work. If you see this picture also, you can see an idea, you will get an idea how this actual work was taking place and how people were involved here, right? As I am saying that this late 19th century, this was a craft, and the craft of iron smelting was declining. So I am talking about late 19th century after 1870, 1880. And there is a word which, if you read this left part, you'll see slag heaps. Dhatu mal. That is, once the metal is being taken out of these process of smelting, whatever is remaining is slag heaps. Slag heaps. Dhatu mal in Hindi it's called as Dhatu mal. Okay, let's get back now. As I was saying that this iron smelting was in decline. And what was the reason? There were multiple reasons. So the first reason was that new forest law, because you need charcoal. Charcoal comes from wood, and wood comes from forest. And these forests were reserved by the Britishers, and they stopped people from coming inside. So when they were not getting wood, in turn charcoal, in turn they were not able to do the iron smelting. So this was the problem. So many people, they gave up this job. They said, no, there is a problem now, we cannot go inside. But certain areas, Britishers allowed, okay, please come, because they need to have that rail plank. So they need people to come. But the problem was, the forest department, for each furnace, for each bhatti, they were employing a lot of tax. 100 they were earning, 500 tax they were levied on. So this, again, they cannot pay this amount of tax. So they said, okay, let's stop this work, let's do something else. And one more problem was there. This was the first one, this was the second one, tax, and first was the prevention of entering forest. The third one was, the Britain, it was sending iron and steel. And the people in India, they started using this iron and steel from outside, rather than using the Indian made this iron and steel. So this was multiple problems, but the new competition was still to come in earlier 20th century. So before going to that, let me show you a picture. This is a village in central India, and these are called Agarias. And these are the communities of iron smelters only. So they were doing iron smelting only at that time. Agarias. Loha Pragnal, their job was like this. And very famous community it is, So all these problems are there, but the other problem also happened, like the famines. So the famines, it devastated these people. What they will eat? Because iron smelting will only come when they can eat. Finally, they migrated and they left all the jobs in furnaces. Iron steel factories come up in India. What does it mean? Loha and Ispat. Iron steel factories, how did they come up in India? So before that, let me give you a story, a very interesting story. It's 1904. Two gentlemen, it was very hot at that time, April. One was Charles Weld. Here is his name. He was an American geologist, studying about land and the land content, the soil, etc. So he was the expert on that. And here you see, he is Dorabji Tata. And I am taking a very big name, Jamshedji Tata. So Dorabji Tata was the eldest son of the great Jamshedji Tata. So now these two gentlemen, they were roaming around, traveling in Chhattisgarh, because they wanted to search the iron ore deposits. Iron ore means from where the iron is extracted. So they gave a lot of time, they were moving here and there. They went to places. Then one day it happened that when they were just moving around, going to forest and then going to village, they saw certain men and women, a group of men and women, and they were carrying on their head, that is the basket loads of iron ore, tokri. And it was iron ore, Loha Ayask, iron ore. And when they just asked them, you are having these iron ore, from where you are getting it? And these people were Agarias. So the Agarias, basically they are a tribe in Madhya Pradesh, and they are conventionally, they are iron smelters. They are doing this work for ages, Agarias. So they were a tribe in Madhya Pradesh. So what happened? One of them just pointed a finger and indicated a hill, and they said, "We are getting it from there." And this hill was Rajhara Hills. This hill was Rajhara Hills. If you see this hill, it was the best. Let me not tell you. The Charles Weld will tell you. Charles Weld said, "This is one of the finest ores in the world. Whatever we are searching here and there is just near us. It's here only." It was one of the finest ore in the world. And this iron ore, though they cannot use them, these two gentlemen, but it was sent to Bhilai steel plant, and then the rest is history. But what happened to their search? They still were searching, because the problem was this place where they searched, they discovered this iron ore. The problem was water. Water. And in iron and steel industry, water is very important. Water is the crux, key. So this search of a proper place, an optimum place, still continued. After a few years, there was a huge forest area that was cleaned up. And this cleaned up area, there was a river called as Subarna Rekha. Subarna Rekha. Please remember this name. The name is Subarna Rekha. This is a river. So this is the river I am talking about. And here you see, this is the Tata Iron and Steel Factory, later called as Tata Iron and Steel Company. And it was on the banks of the river Subarna Rekha. And this is the picture of 1940. Because iron and steel, it needs water. And that was called later as TISCO. And this township which you see here, township means every facility for every individual. Those people who are working, like their houses, the shops, everything. And this was named as Jamshedpur. And Jamshedpur was named in the honor of the great Jamshedji Tata. And in 1912, this TISCO, Tata Iron and Steel Company, it began producing the steel, ispat. So in 1912 it started. Okay. And TISCO, when it came into being, that was a very opportunity-wise, specific and good time. Because all the steel coming from where? From Britain. So Britain was sending everything. It was textile or iron or steel, whatever. But the time was very peculiar. You see, 1912, the steel was coming from Britain. People were using it, and the railway line were being laid. At that time, it was the big task project which the English have taken in India. So now for that, they need this rail, they need the wheel, they need the bogie part. Okay. So all this needs what? This needs iron. This needs steel. Today also it is needed. So this Britain was fulfilling the need, and those engineers of railway, they were never interested in the Indian born steel. So what happened here? This TISCO or whichever company is making the British quality, they were not matching. That is what the expert were saying. They were really unwilling. They were not interested. They were disinterested in taking this steel which was produced from TISCO or any other setup. But as I said, the time was very important. 1912, the production started, and just in 2 years, there was the First World War. So the First World War broke out, and as I said about textile industry also, the textile stopped coming here. That is why Indian textile industry was able to, take a boon or take a jump. But the iron and steel which was coming from Britain, it was not coming. And in India, the railway was expanding. So who has to be asked? TISCO was asked. we are not having any way to go. Please, Tisco, give us this rail. And they were making the produced shells also. Shells. They were producing shells. Also the carriage wheels, that is the bogie, the wheels. So at that time, the Tisco was given the task of producing shells for war, carriage wheels for the different automobiles. So in 1919, the situation was the colonial government, the British government, was taking the 90% of the steel which was manufactured by Tisco. So Tisco, whatever it is producing, say 100 ton it is producing, 90 ton was taken only by the British government, right? British government was taking it. So this was the very important time which it was a good time when Tisco started. Okay, I'll show you a picture. In 1919, it was so much in demand, this iron steel. They had to increase their or expand their area. They have to put a lot of powerhouses and the boilers, etc., whichever is required for iron and steel production. So they have to build in or extend or expand their office, their factory, multiple fold time. So that is how we know the Tatas are respected so much in India. Ratan Tata is one of the greats today. We salute them. Okay. Now, what we have seen, cotton, textile industry or iron and steel company or industry which only expanded whenever British had some problem or because of some other reason British import declined or it couldn't come. Then only the Indian textile and iron steel industry and other industry, they can come up. So as the nationalist movement 1947, we got the independence. So 1947, before that the national movement started. That was the time, 1919, 1920, it was the main time when the main national movement, the Andolan, Rashtriya Andolan was going on. Now these industrialists, they became stronger, the Tatas and everyone. So now these lobby of industrialists, they became stronger, and because they were actually giving to the society, to the government and to the people. But the British rule was not in a good shape because there was a lot of thrust, protest, aggression coming from the Indian people. They want to want them to go away. So this British rule also only wanted profit. But because of the industrial class, they wanted protection from the government because British rule was all about profit. So that is how they gave them this protection. Okay, I'll have to give you a comparison about Japan and India. Japan and India, very important here. So the history of Japan and India, the industrialization, what happened at that time? We are looking at the perspective of industrialization. The Japan industrialization was different. It was a contrast from Indian industrialization. In India, we have British rule. They just wanted that the content should come or the import should come from Britain, and India is a big market and they wanted profit. They never looked for Indian industries. But in Japan, the government took the control to emancipate, to increase the level of industrialization, to increase the level of the people. So when the Meiji regime came, this was a very important regime, and this assumed the power in 1868. So 1868, when Meiji regime assumed the power, and they wanted to resist the Western domination, because at that time America, Russia and European countries, they were making colonies and they were were stronger, getting stronger and stronger. So Japan didn't want that to happen. So in order to have that Western domination stop, they wanted that industrialization should be done in our country. We need to be industry-wise stronger. So they increased the level of development of postal services, the telegraphs, the railways, the steam engines, especially the steam engine powered shipping. So most advanced technology which at that time which was there in West, they didn't feel Rashtravad or nationalism. They just imported it and adapted it to the needs of Japan. So innovation they were not against, And also, they went a step ahead. They called the foreign expert, Western expert, and they taught the Japanese professionals so that they learn what is going on. So what happened here is they also gave the loan through banks. So government, they started a lot of industries by themselves. They initiated it, and then when it was properly established, it was given to different business families, respected business families. Okay, so this was done all in under control, not just one or two people. It was being sold right now. What we are facing in India. So this contrast which you see here in British rule, same what happened to us, and Japan what it did. Okay, this is all about this discussion. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself.